I will start with a short presentation of the IABM data on the topic, showing the major trend and the drivers of change. Following, we will have a panel discussion with Nagra, Massive, and Brightcove. At the end of the panel, I will get the questions from the audience. Let's start having a look at some of the main drivers of change in consume. Like in Monetize, investment is significantly rising in consume as media companies increasingly go direct to consumer. Not surprisingly, multi-platform content delivery tops the ranking of spending drivers, followed by 5G, immersive format, virtualization, and AI. In this block of the content chain, investment in AI is rising as media companies increasingly crunch consumers' data to provide better services, including better content recommendations. Some companies mentioned the importance of virtual assistants like voice recognition technologies to resolve the personalization challenge. 5G is an interesting one as media companies are increasingly looking at it to distribute their content direct to consumer. In fact, some broadcasters that want to their content on all devices and platforms are liaising this with consumer electronics manufacturers to make this happen. This is the data that we have on the most important drivers of technology demand in consume. As you can see, the first driver is multi-platform content delivery, as the number of platforms to deliver content is rising. The second one is the adoption of AI and machine learning. And the third is next generation wireless technology with 5G. But let me introduce you our panelists. Today we are with Anthony Smith, Chen Hao, Senior Director of Product Marketing from Nagra, David Pick, Director Solution Engineering Massive, and Tom Shaplan, Sales Manager at Brightcove. Thank you very much for being with us. I will start with a few general questions, and please feel free to jump in and answer. So, what are the drivers of change in consume from your perspective?
Hi, Chiara, and hi, everybody. It's Tom Shaplan from Brightcove here. I think one of the biggest drivers that we're seeing in the consumer space, the driver of change, is the democratization of video. And that's really been led by YouTube. YouTube has made video accessible to everybody in ways that we could never imagine before. For example, it's where I learned to tie a tie. It's how I learned to change a tire on my car at the side of the road in the pouring rain. But it does present some challenges for businesses in terms of messaging and content protection and monetization. So YouTube has enabled this democratization of video where we all expect it, we all want it everywhere. But it isn't necessarily the place that brands, broadcasters, and media organizations want to be to maximize the benefits that they see in content. So that, combined with the proliferation of devices, has been, for us, I think, the major driver of change.
Yeah, this is David Peake from Massive here. Look, I agree with that definitely, and the other point I'd make is that the real gatekeepers here, from our point of view, sort of driving that change is the people who are producing the devices and controlling the platform. So, I mean, what we see is, you know, Apple, Amazon, Google, Roku, they all have screens in different spaces, whether that's, you know, on a laptop, on a phone, on a tablet, on a TV. And what we're starting to see now is, you know, consumers are reaching a point now where they're becoming slightly overloaded with the amount of choice in terms of content and products that they can buy to meet their content needs. And what we're seeing from the platforms is a move towards simplifying the user experience by acting as a gatekeeper to all of that content. So you can see with Roku, they're doing universal search across all content. With Apple, we're seeing some really interesting moves with Apple TV and bringing content from other providers into a single user experience, just to reduce that overhead for consumers who are looking to reduce that complexity and finding what they want to watch.
Okay, so as broadcasters go direct to consumer, the importance of consumer is growing. Which are the challenges they are facing in deploying consumer-facing systems? And please feel free to answer.
Yeah, I think from our point of view, like the OTT landscape, technology and otherwise is just, it seems to be extremely complex in every dimension. So it's not just platforms and devices and encoding. You know, every topic that you could name in the OTT space has really exploded in terms of the complexity and the experience companies need to have in order to play at the top tier level in each of those areas. And we're seeing, you know, the really big players like, you know, Netflix spending huge amounts on technology. One of my favorite stats from last year is that Netflix spent $1.3 billion on technology alone in 2018. So really, that's what operators and broadcasters are up against in terms of experience and depth when it comes to each of these areas they're trying to compete in. And look, broadcasters, I think, have resisted becoming technology companies, quite rightly so. It's not really their core business. But even now, I think buying instead of building is almost as complex, because there's nobody who does all of these things at the level that the big players do. And just integrating those components from specialist vendors in, you know, analytics, user experience, encoding, et cetera, is a highly complex and risky task.
Yeah, I'd very much agree with David on that. It is a big challenge for any broadcaster that wants to get in this space and have a presence everywhere. Not just a technical challenge, a financial challenge, and the cost associated with developing or outsourcing the various components needed to run an OTT service, but also in the sense of how do you monetize it effectively, and understanding the different business models to wrap around these services is a complex question in and of itself. And that's going to have considerations both in terms of the specific audience. So if you're targeting, you know, a very young demographic who have an expectation that content is free, then maybe the SVOD model isn't the best business model to put around your OTT service for that audience. There's also geographical considerations, which is really fascinating. Brightcove put together some research last year that looked at consumer streaming habits in lots of different territories around the world. And we amalgamated that into a global view, but there are subtle differences region to region in terms of how people prefer to pay for their content and their services. So for example, in Southeast Asia, the expectation is the content is free and the AVOD is the dominant model. By contrast, in Canada, research would suggest that actually there's a much greater leaning towards an SVOD model. So any broadcaster looking to get into this space is looking at the territory they're going to operate in. They have to consider the different monetization models that are going to be appropriate for where they're going to operate. A really interesting example actually is Hook, a Brightcove customer. It's sort of Asia's Netflix for those that don't know who Hook are. They're absolutely enormous. And they're actually changing the business model, the financial model, depending upon the region. So for example, in Indonesia, they've actually launched a subscription service for their OTT platform, which has the local currency equivalent of 25 cents a day. So they have a daily subscription, 25 cents, and that's working for them. But it's working for them because they're looking specifically at that geography and that audience and understanding exactly the preferred payment model for who they're actually trying to target. And when you think about, you know, the complexity of the technology and the complexity of the finances and how you monetize these things, it is a massive challenge for broadcasters, but it is a surmountable one. It's just that we just need the data and the understanding of the best way of doing it to get them to where they need to be.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I guess the other thing that occurred to me as you were saying that is that, you know, broadcasters and operators are not traditionally thought of as being very agile organizations. And I think the old mindset of, you know, building a platform and building out a capability over 9 months, 12 months, and then really not doing very much with it in terms of evolving it for the next 5 years and then rebuilding, it just doesn't work in the OTT space. You know, people have to shift to that mindset of getting to market quickly, measuring your audience, understanding what they want, and actually experimenting you know, in a very agile way to optimize your service over time. And I think that's really a huge shift in the way that these organizations need to function. And that's a challenge that we often have to help organizations sort of change their way of working to shift to that mindset.
That's interesting. And what are the features that need to be added to provide the right user experience?
Well, I think we all have, as consumers, an expectation that, for the most part, has been set by the dominant OTT providers like Netflix. So there's a familiarity element in terms of what we expect of the user experience. Specific features that we often come across when we're working with broadcasters and media companies looking to get into OTT, that people sort of speak to as being kind of core requirements are things like recently watched, the ability to pick up from where you left off but on a different device, things like offline download. I mean, these are features that I think we all now as consumers expect as part of a core package. But it isn't, I don't think, just these kind of app level features that are the expectation. There's also the expectation around the actual how you engage with the subscription element of the platform. For example, if it is an SVOD service, the ability to have access to free trials and promotions, and for the UX around that to be easy and seamless. The ability to have things like social sign-on. So there are a lot of these things which maybe we take for granted now for those that use OTT services regularly, because we almost expect them. But these are definitely the things that set the trend for the UX that works best for the audience and that broadcasters look to include when they're rolling out a new service.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And like the features, like downloads, continue watching, end of play experience. There's a huge list of things now which are pretty much table stakes in terms of building an OTT service. And I work in the solutions team at Massive, and basically we see all of the RFPs coming through. And what we see is, as soon as Netflix or Amazon Video or one of the big players finally launches something like downloads, was a feature that everyone said, oh, why doesn't Netflix do downloads? And then one day they did, and all of a sudden everyone needs to have that feature in order to, because that's the new baseline in terms of what consumers expect. But I think, looking at it from a slightly different point of view, we think that the key thing you need to provide, like a modern UX these days, is actually the right tools as an operator to control your user experience and to evolve it in real time and in a customer-centric way. This old approach of building a client user experience and then, again, not doing very much with it on a frequent basis just doesn't work anymore. That static user experience. So one thing that Massive specializes in, and what our core product does, is giving the tools to operators to actually iterate on their user experience, to schedule content and functionality and features to different sets of users, whether that's based on their demographics, their device, the time of day, really any data that an operator has about their user should be a way of targeting content and functionality at them.
Okay. Personalization media experience is becoming increasingly important. How are you addressing this, and what are broadcasters' priority with regards to personalization?
I think what we see with our customers is that almost everyone we work with has a fairly decent data strategy. Everyone understands that data is gold, and we definitely need to collect it, and we need to understand our customers. The problem is that very few companies are actually data driven and are actually using that data on a day-to-day basis to drive their business decisions and the features they launch and the way that they buy content and so on. And as I said before, like everything else in OTT, data science is really complicated. Netflix, again, has entire data science teams dedicated to single rails within their application, whereas other people are just having a single data guide to sort of look at their analytics and then maybe give them some insights about what they should be doing. again, the big players are spending huge amounts of time and money on really micro optimization of features within their services. So, what our platform allows operators to do is really to act on data. So bringing in information about customers from, whether that's a CRM or an analytics platform or whoever, identifying trends in the audience, based on their behavior, and then actually optimizing for those use cases. And some of this is very deliberate. It's not artificial intelligence or machine learning. It's just plain old business sense. A simple example: if you know that your customer's credit card is about to expire, you should be able to message them through any channel necessary to get them to update that information. And this is something that our platform and other platforms are now starting to take hold of. So actioning those key events in the consumer life cycle to actually prevent churn, to keep people more engaged with services.
Yeah, I would wholly agree with David really there. I don't think I can add anything more. It's down to the data, but to be truly effective in this space, the investment needed to really both collect, understand, and then ultimately action that data is significant. So yeah, absolutely agree with David's point.
So data is fundamental. And as we see in the latest months, 5G is not a hype anymore. How will this new technology impact the consumption of content?
Well, more and more video is our expectation. I mean, we know that internet traffic today is 75% video, and Cisco projects that it will be something like 82% by 2022. So the trend of content consumption is only going to increase with 5G. It is going to enable that in more locations at faster speeds than ever before. We also believe it will open up what people can actually do with video, whether that's introducing sort of new levels of interactivity or more options for personalized storytelling. As people in the video business, it's an exciting trend to be involved in, and just speaks to both growth for companies like Brightcove and Massive and broadcasters, but also a better experience ultimately for the consumer, a more enjoyable, higher quality consumer experience when watching video.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd say it's probably not going to change very much in the current ecosystem, other than increasing consumption. So, people already have services in all of the places where 5G is really going to change the ability to deliver content. But we see 5G more as sort of an enabling technology for things that are on the cusp of major adoption. Things like augmented reality, VR, 360 video, that sort of stuff actually requires higher bandwidth and requires better connectivity. So I think it's infrastructure for the next mind shift in the industry.
And multi-platform content delivery is considered the top driver of change in consume. What are the challenges to deliver content everywhere, and how do you deal with the multi-screen engagement?
Yeah, this is really our bread and butter. So, our platform, Massive Access, has a set of reference applications across literally everything that can play video, and we build multi-screen applications for almost every device in the world. And the reality of that is essentially maintaining client applications in 4 completely different technology stacks. That's development languages and SDKs and tooling and simulators and so on, but also different screen sizes, different input methods, different platform features, and doing that across all of the features that users now expect in an OTT service is just hugely complex. It requires a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of iteration and refinement to actually deliver something that's consistent across all of those different screen sizes and ecosystems. And making things worse now is that all of these platforms are not staying still. They're all trying to differentiate themselves in the eyes of consumers with, better user experience, syndication of content, unique features that are basically designed to make them stand out against the competition. So just supporting all of that evolution and that innovation is just it's just a large investment. And the reason we do that is to give the customers that we work with a great starting point for launching a service. So they don't have that immense upfront cost of trying to reach the largest number of screens possible.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's the challenge that we face at Brightcove too, in terms of the technical challenge of packaging and delivering video to so many different operating systems and devices. The cost challenge in terms of how you manage the development of multiple applications for multiple devices, and then continuously updating those so that they don't stay static, that they are dynamic and adapt and change over time. But there are ways to deal with those challenges. I do think it's becoming easier in a sense, because in the world of technology in the industry, we are getting better at understanding how to manage multi-platform services, both in terms of how we develop the products and services themselves, but also just having a better understanding of what the changes coming up might be. The other thing I think as well is that broadcasters and media organizations can harness some of the data that we were talking about earlier to really focus and double down on the platforms that are going to matter most for their specific audience. Of course, we have a desire to have applications and OTT presence on as many platforms as possible, but ultimately it's really understanding, okay, well, what are the most important ones, at least to start with, where you have to be in order to get to your target audience. The research that I referenced earlier as an example told us a lot about actually, the differences between if you're running an OTT services for sports content. Unsurprisingly, 77% of people who want to watch live sports content want to watch that on a television. So if you're developing an OTT application that services that market, if that's your bread and butter, then your focus needs to be on developing applications for TVs, smart TVs, and connected TV devices. I'm not saying that they shouldn't build for mobile, but certainly just being able to differentiate between those platforms that are going to give you the biggest benefit and meet the audience's needs, and those platforms that are more nice to haves will help organizations and broadcasters, I suppose, navigate multi-platform content delivery much easier than trying to do everything at once.
Okay, and what about the challenges to provide an interactive live experience?
I mean, live is challenging. Live requires some pretty extensive, scalable back-end infrastructure, particularly when you're talking about large audiences. Again, going back to the research that I referenced, we asked people what are the main reasons for them abandoning a live stream, and unsurprisingly, 40% of people cited buffering as the reason. 37% cited poor video quality. So the major challenge in live is to deliver a quality experience. Now we've kind of nailed that within video on demand, but live is still a developing beast. And at Brightcove, we've been able to kind of achieve the level of quality on live streaming really by utilizing cloud-based architecture, but also specifically building a platform that's built to scale. So for example, Tennis Australia, we had, I think, millions of concurrent viewers for live streams over a 2-week period. And through that platform, we're able to achieve the quality that I think audiences expect. Interactivity on that is a whole extra layer of complexity. But ultimately, if the actual quality of the live stream is what it needs to be, then the user is going to have a great experience, and that's what matters most.
Yeah, exactly the same experience on the massive side. So we have a couple of customers now that are seeing, frequently over 1 million concurrent streams for live events. So DAZN is one of them. So they're basically trying to be the Netflix of sports. They have a global service now covering a whole bunch of different regions. And on a technology front, it's still challenging to reach. It's not even the scale. It's the nature for us of live sports streaming, where not only do you have 1 million people using the service at the same time, but they all seem to show up 5 minutes before the event starts. So with traditional scaling approaches, there's literally no way you can build a platform that can scale up that quickly to deal with that sort of load, from having a few servers running to having 60 servers running, servicing that sort of audience. So we've built up a lot of expertise in that area now, and we're not in the video streaming space, but we often sit in front of the rest of the platform. So things like identity and commerce and analytics and everything else comes into play with that sort of scale as well. And we often find ourselves sort of insulating everyone else from that sort of chaos. Every vendor that you work with in this space will be like, oh yeah, we're scalable. We can deal with anything. But when you actually, when push comes to shove and 1 million people show up in 5 minutes, you need to build systems in a very, in a way that if anything does fail, if any of the dependencies of the platform fail, you handle that in a graceful way. And some of those are really business decisions around, how do we deal with platform outages and components within the platform failing? The right decision is often the worst case scenario, just let people watch the video. If the identity service is down, or you can't take payments from people's credit cards, just let them watch the event and deal with the fallout later. Because in the end, the customer experience and the damage that you can do to yourself by falling down in one of those live events is really it's much higher than the missed revenue. If you're not collecting payments.
That's interesting. And what about cloud? We heard a lot about cloud at NAB 2019. How do you use the technology to provide a video experience to the users?
Well, I think it's just as David just mentioned, really. I mean, Brightco's platform is a wholly SaaS platform, software as a service. We're 100% cloud-based, and that enables us to respond to the exact scenario of all of a sudden you have 5 million concurrent users joining the same stream within 5 minutes. So the cloud enables us to scale to that demand and spin up new instances quickly, whether that's actually at the stream itself, or when it comes to transcoding the content, as broadcasters will typically upload vast quantities of content to the platform. So the cloud enables us to respond quickly, but also in a way that supports the resilient failover mechanisms that David referenced, to ensure that, at the very least, you're giving the audience the service. And I would echo again his point around absolutely make sure that they can watch and see the content, because as consumers, we're fickle beasts, and one bad experience, we might not come back. So the cloud supports the ability to deliver the experience for the user without so many risks, for example, around poor service delivery or service failure that you might see through the more old school means of delivering video.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I really don't know how we would operate in this space if cloud infrastructure wasn't a thing. It just gives you that. It gives our customers global reach, more or less infinite scalability. The only other way we could do it would be to have a very large infrastructure team that was actually flying around the world and setting up servers in data centers. So, I think cloud technology and services have really been an enabling technology for a whole bunch of SaaS providers that really couldn't afford to do it any other way. I guess the interesting trend we're seeing now is that each cloud provider is sort of slowly eking its way from just providing infrastructure as a service into providing sort of managed services around different functionalities. So, AWS is a good example. Acquired Elemental, which was an encoding technology company, and what was once the remit of only the big OBPs and the video platforms out there is now at least partially available as something you can spin up within AWS. Now, of course, there's still a whole lot of stuff you need to build around that to actually build out a video platform. But I think over time we're going to see those cloud platforms take a larger percentage of the complexity out of building these sort of services.
And as they go direct to consumer, broadcasters are increasingly having conversations with device manufacturers, such as smart TV providers. Some even talk about broadcasting directly to driverless cars. What is the effect of this trend on your business?
Yeah, smart TVs are a bit of a speciality for Massive. We've been building OTT apps for since OTT platforms were a thing, and I've got to say those early days on the early smart TVs were really some of the most painful from an engineering standpoint. These were very young platforms from hardware vendors that didn't really have much experience in building development platforms for companies like ours to build applications for. So even now, reaching some of those smart TV platforms is still pretty challenging. There's people don't buy a new TV every year or two. They sometimes have TVs that they've had for 10 years, for even longer in some cases. And that means that supporting those platforms in terms of building applications is just means a lot of testing across devices with a huge range of performance capabilities and quirks that you have to deal with. And I guess the advantage we have in this space is only that we've been doing it for so long, and we have a huge library of knowledge built up around how each of these platforms and iterations of the actual software that runs on these TVs, how they behave, and how you can actually deliver a decent experience on them.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the new devices and new platforms, will inevitably come along. And as technology companies, it's our job to react and respond to that. But also from a video delivery side, which tends to be Brightco's bread and butter, we have a kind of a rich history now of 15 years of operating in this space, and we've sort of led the charge on some key developments in video delivery, whether that's being the primary sponsor of video.js or being a pioneer in video stitching and ad insertion. It is just the case that new challenges, new opportunities will come along, and we as a company need to look at, okay, well, from a technology perspective, how do we respond to that, but also how do we lead the conversation through our experience and through our knowledge in a way that means that the opportunity that new devices and platforms present is one that as many organizations as they can take advantage of those new platforms and devices. And I think it's through just years of experience and knowledge that we're able to do that, and that will continue, I think, for some time to come.
I have one more question, and then I will take a couple from the audience. So what's coming next in content consumption technology and workflows, and what's your company planning for?
From Massive's perspective, we're still very focused on the user experience of these services, and we're hard at work on the next generation of tooling and tools that allow operators to actually take control of their user experience across all of these very different technology platforms. And the big part of that for us is really closing the loop on that cycle of measuring, analyzing, and optimizing a service over time, and trying to build tools that make that very simple for non-technical users within an organization to actually go and do that within their user experience on a day-to-day basis. And we should have some exciting announcements this year at IBC. So if anyone's attending that, come by Massive, and we should have some exciting new demos.
For Brightcove, it's I suppose a few things. One is live. We see increasing requirements from our customers to push live further and further and to do more with it. All of which, as I mentioned earlier, requires a scalable, resilient infrastructure. So we're investing really heavily in that space because we understand both the need, but also the audience demand for more and more live content. Certainly, we're looking at the increased challenges around content protection and how we can ensure that when we're working with our customers, we're able to offer them, fantastic content protection, because ultimately, particularly when broadcasters and media organizations are looking at territories beyond, Europe and the US, content piracy and content protection is a challenge. And so we're investing heavily in our technology to make sure that that's a challenge that broadcasters and media organizations can actually deal with and feel comfortable that their content is going to be protected and secure. And I'm sure there's a range of other technical improvements and announcements on their way that are probably far above my pay grade. So perhaps, as David said, IBC will be the time to reveal some of those.
Okay, thank you. One question for the audience is, can a user experience platform increase OTT traffic? Do you have any use cases?
Yeah, we have a pretty decent one on our website, actually, around Telecine, which is an operator in Brazil. So nearly 2 years ago, we basically rebuilt their platform, which meant new user experience and client applications across all of the devices that they reached. And importantly, we leveraged our platform to give them the tools to actually work with that user experience on a day-to-day basis. And what they saw over the 12 months after launch was a 75% uplift in their audience size. Look, I'm sure that was not entirely UX. There was a bunch of marketing and other activities behind that. But what they saw was not just an increase in their audience size, but just increased engagement on a day-to-day basis with their content and with their service, which of course translates into stickiness and into reducing things like churn.
Yeah, just to add to that from Brightcove perspective, it's hard to attribute solely user experience to increased OTT traffic. There is a lot of different components in an OTT service. Everything from how you might evolve the monetization over time, to improvements in the back end of the video delivery, to where a broadcaster or OTT company is spending their marketing budget. So it's hard to link those two in a really clear scientific way, but in delivering a better user experience, are you likely to see an increase in your traffic? Yes, ultimately, in terms of as consumers, how we want to consume content, we want to consume it regularly, we want to be engaged with the platforms and the services that we're signed up to, and the easier we make that from a UX perspective, the more likely it is that they'll consume the content. So yeah.
Okay, and one more question is, what are the benefits of Android TV? How can it improve the user experience?
Yeah, we've launched a couple of Android TV applications now, including one operator tier experience. And for those that don't know, Android TV operator tier is basically a program within the Android ecosystem that allows custom hardware manufacturers to create a device that runs Android TV, and then for an operator to essentially acquire a license to control the entry point of that user experience, which means that they get the benefits of having a mature ecosystem like Android TV, which has an app store and has Google services and a whole bunch of apps built for that platform already. But the key advantage is that it allows them to control that entry point. So when the box powers on, it can have their logo, it can have their content on the home screen, and really, this is a space that used to be filled with custom hardware and some different firmwares from different vendors out there. And I guess compared to most smart TV platforms out there, Android TV is really a much more mature platform ecosystem in terms of all of that, developer tooling. Of course, there's alignment with Android mobile. The developer experience is much better building apps for Android TV. And generally what we find is that it's easier to deliver a great user experience on that platform than some of the HTML-based smart TV platforms. I think that's the biggest change we're seeing, is that it's allowing operators to leverage the Android ecosystem while still keeping control of their audience and keeping control of that core experience. And of course, that enables those sort of aggregation business use cases, where not only are they promoting their content on the home screen, they can allow users entry points into Netflix and Amazon Video and really anyone else that they want to partner.
Okay, that was great. Thank you so much for your insight and your time.